Good morning, Andy Johnson here. We're talking about teaching and documenting performance-based standards. Every state has academic standards, or most standards do. Minnesota's, you can find them right there. Pause and cut and paste or whatever if you want. But defining our term, performance-based standards, it defines a skill to be mastered. Content standards, as we'll see, defines content to be learned. A performance standard is what students should be able to do as a result of instruction. As a result of instruction is important. That means you instruct first and then you document. A lot of people forget that. If students don't know a standard, it is your responsibility to actually teach the gosh darn thing. In a performance-based standard, students should demonstrate by actually doing something, a product or performance. Now, to be useful, a performance-based standard needs to be specific enough to be measured or documented, and flexible enough to actually be used as you approach performance-based standards. And I will show you some examples of this. However, to document, don't always think that you have to do some gosh darn test. We have too many tests that do nothing to improve education. So to document a performance-based standard, let's look at performance. Keep that in mind. Performance. That means to do something. So to document, you would include the actual student product. Or if it's a performance, you could include a rubric or a checklist of some sort. For example, to document inquiry, you would include the lab report. Now, here is a standard, Minnesota Academic Standards on science, and you can stop this and read it if you want, but an example, scientific inquiry. That's an actual standard, a performance-based standard. And here are all substandards related to that. So I have to document and demonstrate that they can do each one of these. How would I do that? Well, I could teach them about inquiry. If you want to know how to do that, get my book, Making Connections in Elementary and Middle School Social Studies. I go over specifically what inquiry is. But then I'd actually include individual students' lab report, where they describe the conditions and the results. And I could then actually include a checklist. I like to have students rate on one side and teacher on the other. And here are all the skills or sub-skills related to inquiry. Content standards look at knowledge, what students should know or understand. Different, technically, than performance-based standards. Now, a few standards are good, whether in K-12 education or in teacher preparations. But people say, ooh, a few standards are good, therefore a whole bunch of standards must be really good. That's insanity. It's like saying one glass of wine before bedtime is good, therefore 17 must be really good. That is insanity. However, that is the case that is happening with standards. People are doing too many of them, thinking that you can actually create a better curriculum or a better product or better education. You get all these standards and people are just doing dot to dot with little standards, and you get a lot of stuff done superficially. National Council of Research says we need to teach less things more deeply. So if the standards people would actually read research related to teaching and learning, they would cut the standards in half. But few people who make education policy seem to read research. Don't get me going. Standards should describe the learning experience, but not prescribe. Standards are not a curriculum. They should be used intelligently, interpret intelligently. All right? Now, not everything needs to be quantified. Get rid of this idea that you have to have a test to measure things. Get rid of that. Standards should inform the learning experience, should inform your curriculum. They're very good for that, but it should not define the experience. rigor is different from complexity. People think, oh, we'll make this all complex and therefore we'll have academic rigor. No, complexity just means confusion. You can have academic rigor, but keep things very simple. Quality is different from quantity. Oh, we'll have a whole bunch of standards, and then we'll have better education. We have worse education when we have too gosh darn many standards. And that's what's happening to K-12 education and teacher education. Fewer standards if you listen to the National Research Council and read research related to teaching and learning. Fewer things should be taught more in depth. And again, standards, that should be 7, not 4, should inform the learning experience, but not define the learning experience. We'll look at the next section on how to actually teach performance-based standards.